Welcome to PureLogic University. Today we've got Jason Barton from Red Hat and Shane Lafreniere from PureLogic. We've had a couple questions lately about why Red Hat is only an OS, and the two technical gurus here today are going to walk you through that. All right, Jason, Shane, are you ready to take it away?
Will do.
Sure thing.
Okay, enjoy. Thank you very much for being part of PureLogic University, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
So Jason, I hear all the time, Red Hat, it's just an operating system company.
Yeah.
Well, why does that happen? I mean, and I shake my head a lot too, because it's like they have a full ecosystem of product line, straight from the grassroots all the way into the high level consumption as a service type of capability.
That's right.
Tell me about the top 3 things you think that people need to remember about Red Hat as the full ecosystem.
You know, victim of your own success, right? So obviously Red Hat Enterprise Linux, extremely successful, huge enterprise market share. But what we've really tried to do as a company, right, is work in the open source communities, contribute as much as we can, and get behind a lot of, I guess, the value that people want to derive from their business processes and the investments that they make in their IT operational practices. And if we started to kind of break that down a little bit, maybe I'd call 3 layers, right? So we've got that real gem in Red Hat Enterprise Linux. But what do we want to do with that, right? We want to try to build some good operational practices, right, at that infrastructure layer. And then we're going to have kind of that crossover point, right, to where, well, if we've got infrastructure, we need to do something with it. Right, so we got to put some business personality in there, right? We actually need to have those applications that are turned into services, either for internal partners or for customers. So that's that second layer.
And then be able to scale it out too on the virtualization space and go to the masses. Absolutely.
So we talked about first layer, kind of infrastructure and portable operational practices. Second layer, right? We need to really start to grab those applications and get them into service to try to get to that business value.
Right.
And then on top of that, there's actually a third layer that people really are not that familiar with often, which is about our ability to kind of take part in the actual business process themselves, right? Allow you to become a little bit more flexible and dynamic in the way that you interact in the market through your applications and services. And that might be a little bit, I guess, high level of a statement, but we'll dig down in a little bit on that one.
Okay, well, let's explore the first layer then. On the infrastructure side, obviously Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Red Hat virtualization, I've heard terms of satellite, I've heard terms of capsules.
Yeah.
So give me a quick 2-second overview of that.
Maybe you want me to draw something for a second, or?
I'm ready.
Yeah, I'm ready too. So maybe what we'll do is we'll kind of talk about maybe kind of like a common workflow here, where if I talk that we have a developer, right? The first thing that they're going to want to actually ask, right? A pretty common question. I want to go to my operations people, right? And I'm going to ask for some sort of access to infrastructure so that I can get my application created, packaged, and deployed into some sort of service. At this point,
or even the lab environment itself.
The lab environment itself. And Shane had actually already mentioned things like our satellite servers, right? For lifecycle management. We have other things like identity management. We have other things like orchestration tools as well from an automation perspective. So besides some of the operational tooling, which might be lifecycle management, right? We also might have in that space things like I guess monitoring as well, right? Over on the side, we have an entire other discipline, right, of automation tooling, right? Things like Ansible, right, Chef, right, Puppet. Right, so what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to have good efficiency around the use of Red Hat Enterprise Linux to get into deployment where I want it to be. I want it to be a, well-disciplined, well-structured, well-defined, and versioned, right, operating system that is deployed as I'd like it to be. And then I want to be able to start to actually control its life cycle within the infrastructure. And I'm going to do that with things like Red Hat Satellite.
And it's typically a dev request, or in a sense, not necessarily an operations-driven process, but a development or an application-driven process to say, I need an environment.
That's right.
I know I have to put something onto the operating system or onto a full-blown deployment in the lab. I need to have infrastructure, I need to have virtualization. How do I manage it? And you also enable the administrators in ops with satellite to go in and do the updates, do the patch release.
That's right. You can absolutely get to the concept of like a self-service provisioning for the developers. So, and at the end of the day, right, frustration builds inside your organization when the people that are tasked to try to actually create some sort of business value, right, that's what the applications and the services are. There's some sort of relationship, right, with a customer or another consumer, right, and you're going to represent that business process as your application or service. If they can't get the infrastructure to do their job, one, not good for the business, and quite frankly, not good for the developers or the developer teams either. Right. So we're going to work towards making sure that these requests down to the operations people, right, are well served and served quickly.
Well, and Jason, that then leads me into the next step. Obviously, we've made our developer happy in being able to actually get something done. But what about the ops guy and his world? He's got to do this repeatedly over and over again for every developer. How do I go and enable that functionality?
Yeah, that's right. That's going to come back to when we were talking about the automation piece and also when I talk about operational portability. So we've all got a lot of legacy investment, right? We've got our bare metal environments, right, as infrastructure. We've got virtualization. We're probably actually starting to adopt some different cloud type of providers as well. So you've heard me already say once or twice, operational portability. Where does this start to kick in? So at the bottom here, what we've really tried to do at Red Hat is make sure that you can have this idea of operational portability, right? Which is, I may actually have relationships with, right, VMware, right? Or maybe I've got Microsoft in here, right, with Hyper-V.
Or the Azure stack as well.
Or the Azure stack as well, right? I got my bare metal, right? And then I also have some cloud providers as well. Maybe I'm starting to look at AWS. Maybe I'm starting to look at, well, we already mentioned Azure, but we'll put them in there as well. So how am I going to go about, we started this off by saying, well, they're just an operating system company. Well, wouldn't it be nice if you could actually have one operational practice that this operations team could still actually get that Red Hat Enterprise Linux, a well-defined, well-disciplined, versioned operating system, right? With a particular personality built into it, right? Configuration management. Wouldn't it be nice if you could actually get that same process to place things here, or here, or here, or here, allowing it to be much easier for that developer to make a very reasonable request to have self-service provisioning. I just want to be able to stand up a well-understood environment, right? Be it test, or my development environment, or production. So
you have a catalog of items. As an ops guy, I've got a catalog of offerings for the developer to consume. How easy are you going to make it for me in the operations to not only deliver that service, but also to care and feed it and do the health and welfare? And do I have to be at a keyboard a lot?
Yeah, so great point, right? As far as actually having that catalog, right, I can actually look at it at two different layers. There's the operational staff that sits pretty close, right, to the actual operational practices themselves. And I might look at something like an Ansible, right, that pretty close to the actual operational staff oftentimes, right? Creation of automated playbooks or roles that represent a series of tasks, right, to allow you to just be a little bit more efficient. Yep. So I might actually have a catalog there that's made available to the actual operational staff itself. Right. Now I can also use Ansible to start making a catalog available to the developers. But if I move up the stack even a little bit more, I might want to start looking at something like a cloud management platform like CloudForms. And that CloudForms can actually be that oversight, that manager of managers, if you will. So once I have a lot of different types of infrastructures, CloudForms as a cloud management platform can actually, in a sense, interact directly through APIs, right? Often the actual provisioning pieces of CloudForms provided by the manufacturers themselves, right? Microsoft works with us, other vendors as well have worked with us, and that actually allows us to start monitoring, right? Starts to actually being able to do things like, say, chargeback or showback, allows us to be able to do things like actual control and provisioning of those environments, right? Right. One place. So a natural self-service portal to the developers through CloudForms.
And the buzzword for that is OpenShift, OpenStack.
OpenStack being one of the actual...
Space?
Yeah, OpenStack being one of the actual another infrastructure provider that you can actually think of OpenStack as a private cloud on-prem.
Oh, that's pretty cool. The developer's happy, the operations guy can deploy it, but the business guy still wants his application. So how do we actually get all the application components into the environment as well?
Yeah. Okay.
And then provide value for the business owner. So if the business owner is sitting here waiting for his application to be deployed, waiting for that revenue stream to come in, how do I help operations and help the developer get the application into the environment through a continuous life cycle and then actually spurn that for the business?
So a really important thing, the word that you just used is waiting, right? Like we've got a common theme here, right? Waiting, right?
Yeah.
Waiting, right? And to a certain degree, we also kind of talked about a little bit of happiness down here. What we want to try to do is we want to try to shed some of the work in the operations layer that probably people don't want to be doing all the time, right? Which is handling things like change requests, trouble tickets, things like that, where the ticket comes in, the service request comes in because the developer says something like, I would like a test environment, or I'd like a development environment. We can automate that. So why is this person that has a lot of value actually doing that, right? They shouldn't be, right? We're going to take advantage of things like the automation layers that we have, the self-service provisioning layers that we have, and we're going to take that away from them and allow them to do higher value add things. What are some of the higher value add things? Like concepts like fast feedback and lead times, right? We want to be able to get to the point where we can deploy those applications that they're looking for, right, quickly, right, so that we can get to money, right? How are we going to do something like that? We want the operations teams and the development teams being able to work together so that they can build a better operational practice around delivering quickly.
Right. And you're, in a sense, leveraging the DevOps world of CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous development, and giving that as a version to the ops, and using it in development as well.
That's right. If we were to dig down a little bit, we'd start to say again that idea of fast feedback and lead times. Lead times. We want to be able to get out applications or releases to applications very quickly, right? That fast feedback. We want to know whether we're on target or not, right? There's an audience for what we're doing from a business process perspective. Let's find out whether it's really valuable or not.
Right.
So we need to be able to get applications from here, the application creation stage. We need to be able to do two things. We need to be able to package the application, and then we need to be able to deploy that application. You've heard me say a few times in a versioned way, right? I always wanted to have it versioned. So this operational staff is going to work with the developers to make sure that they have a method to package the application consistently, and we're going to do that with a technology primitive called containers. And we're going to hand it over in a deployment or a platform as a service, something that on the Red Hat side we call OpenShift, right, which is our platform as a service, and it's going to be that container orchestration layer so that we start to have a very well balanced application lifecycle management. We're going to be able to take something created by the developers, we're going to be able to package it, and then we're going to be able to deploy it consistently and rapidly so that you can get to that money that you were talking about, right, either in cost savings or in revenue or some other way to measure success for your business.
Right. And you said containers, so that lights up, oh, is it Docker? Well, it's actually sort of Docker on steroids in the Red Hat world.
Yeah, that's right. So, like many things, right, if we think back to the traditional world of virtual machines, right? If you just look at a virtual machine itself, it transformed IT operations 15 years ago, right? Started on the developers' desktops and then slowly migrated towards the data center. This is going to have, these containers are going to have the exact same impact, humongous impact from an operational perspective as well as application creation perspective. So that primitive, right, when you have many, many VMs, there was a whole industry born and a company born called VMware that we all know and love, right? And they came out with tooling to help manage those environments. What we need to do with containers, we need to do exactly the same thing. We have a new tool chain coming, right? And that tool chain in the industry, right, is container orchestration, right? And on top of that, we need another layer that makes the world a little bit easier for developers to actually interact with that. And that's what you get out of something like an OpenShift.
And it's not coming, it's actually in OpenShift. So
it absolutely is.
So you're able to build, in a sense, a production release schedule and a production release timeline of the application going into production, and even if you're updating it, and that can be a separate flow than the dev cycle as a whole.
That's right, that's right. So we've got efficiency. So the way I sometimes talk about it, from the time that a business analyst or someone that works with the business side of the organization that you work with, once they collect those requirements, right, you have to start representing them as something within your kind of digital space, if you will, right? And that's how we're doing most of these things. We're interacting with our customers and our business partners through some sort of applications and services. So right from that start, we're going to flow. Red Hat can help you flow all the way from the business requirements and start collecting as application creation, packaging, deployment, operational practices. So far what's going to make me happy, if you were taking anything away from this, what'll make me happy is if you understand that we can provide the tooling and a lot of the, I guess, guidance around being able to build operationally portable practices. So again, right, we have our infrastructure, compute, storage, networking. All of these things have kind of been, that's been put together by Red Hat and some of the tooling that we have and the guidance that we have so that we can have operational efficiency and portable practices to allow that request, right, to not be a heavy request for your organization, to release the stress on the operational staff so that they can start to do higher value things. What are some of those higher value things that we talked about? That was the second layer. How do we get those applications and services into production, right, without a lot of cost, without a lot of disruption, right?
And still maintain them.
And still maintain them, right? It has to be sustainable. And we talked about using technologies, primitives like the containers, but then the real value starts to come from where the developers and the operators have the ability to come to one place, something like a platform as a service like OpenShift, right? And that's where the developers and the operators can start to work together to have, strong discipline around being able to not just do application creation, but consistent version packaging of those applications, and then also version deployments of those applications. One of the key points right there, why does he keep mentioning this versioning thing every once in a while? You don't necessarily have the ability to go into a production environment in a time of need, like troubleshooting or outages, right? And be able to always figure out what's wrong. Wouldn't it be nice in a world, right, if we can reduce the impact on our customers and consumers by knowing exactly what was in production? And then actually get that well-known version or last known good version back into production. So that's why we talk version.
And I'm an ops guy. I mean, I look for a scheduled change control and a scheduled window of time in the off hours. So how do I control that, but still have the ability to deploy those applications on my own sort of schedule as well? And there's some rigor in that space as well. So with OpenShift, you can actually have two sets of delivery types of cycles and run the developer cycle and run production cycle at the same time.
That's right. And those are the types of, quite frankly, those are the types of things that we want the operations team working on. We do not want them dealing with service requests or ticket requests of things like, can you stand up another virtual machine for me so that a developer can actually start to do some sort of new project, right? We want those types of low value types of things taken off the hands of the operational staff. And instead, like Shane is saying, have them work with the development team and the business owner to devise a strategy around deployments, right? Do we want to do blue-green deployments? So blue-green deployment being, we'll stand up the new version of the environment and we will test the entire environment. We're able to do that because we're able to do it in an automated way, in a well-disciplined way. Or maybe I'm a retail type of organization where I want to change a little bit about how I'm marketing or branding or positioning some of my products to customers. Maybe it's just where I want a particular button on the screen. So maybe I do that in A/B deployments, right? Where a small fraction of the service behaves a little bit differently. And then we can take analytics on whether it had a positive effect or a negative effect.
Well, let's talk about that at the business layer then. What's the next step of how do I control the application? How do I control that guaranteed message delivery and some of the application space?
Where we've got apps and data, right? We're going to have services, right? Then we're probably going to have some sort of method to provide that reliable message transport that you talked about, right? So we're going to look at kind of the traditional way of looking at things like ESBs, but then maybe also message queues.
So enterprise service buses and message queues, that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also we'll start to look at things like maybe a little bit more of an agile integration, which is maybe a little bit more current. And then finally on top, we're going to go with something called business automation.
Well, and on the MQ side and the business automation side, the IoT space is exactly that space of pulling back content in a certain type of protocol, making sure you have those packets, guarantee the delivery high into the upper end, and then also making decisions with that data. And that's where you're going to go, is how do I take those packets and make decisions with the data and make sure it's not only guaranteed, but it's intelligent.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to the original premise of why to even talk today, Red Hat is just an OS company, right? Something we've heard before and we'll hear in the future too, and proud of it,
Yeah.
right? Very proud of that heritage. But the third thing people probably don't know, right? Do you know that Red Hat is going to provide assets, expertise, guidance on all of these layers, right? Both from a technology perspective, a consulting perspective, a product perspective, a support perspective, where in that apps and data space, right, we might be looking at a variety of different, say, application server technologies, whether they be JEE type of environments or lighter weight environments like supported Tomcat deployments, and then combining that with some of our software-defined storage, right? So JBoss EAP, right, some Tomcat in there as well, right? Maybe some software-defined storage, because at the end of the day, we're all going to build business process and it's going to have something to do with data. And we're going to move that data around from place to place. How do we start to move that around? Well, we're probably going to have a services layer, right? And that services layer is probably going to start to depend these days on something like an API gateway. So the Red Hat 3-scale acquisition that we made, we have an excellent API management platform, right? So we can start to express how these different applications, because we might have a web of them, right? And instead of having a tangled, right, spaghetti type architecture where everything is trying to talk back and forth, we're instead going to try to just start to layer out a nice ability for things to talk to a common service layer, go up to a nice common ESB or message queue and agile integration layer, because first we have the data, then we need to move that data someplace, so we'll start using things like our API management. And then we'll start to move up to another layer where can we guarantee the delivery of this data? And while this data is in transit, can we use something like a JBoss Fuse, right? So JBoss Fuse coming from the Apache Camel community, can we use that to do data routing as well as data transformation? An example of that might be, I have someone I'm Amazon and someone wants to purchase something. So when they purchase, I know your name, I know your credit card number, I know a lot of where you're from and where you want it delivered to. Well, when I start to move that data, that information I have about you, maybe your customer relationship management system needs to know a little bit. And maybe your billing needs to know a little bit. Maybe another, say, customer management system needs to know something else. So maybe I need to transform that data and just break it down into different pieces.
Oh, that's cool.
So now we have that piece as well. Last but not least, we've now moving data around, right? We're doing it reliably, we're doing it consistently in a secure way, and then finally we've transformed the data as we've needed as it's moved around. What if I wanted to actually change my business processes rapidly?
Right, and that's usually the questions the business owners are asking. And, you know, how fast can I get to time to market? What if I make this change? What can be done? And really that full ecosystem, that full stack and its ability to interact and share that data becomes key.
That's right. So this is actually kind of the advanced part of the class, right? And something that, you know, Red Hat has been doing for years and is up to the task of, and we work with many, like the Fortune 500 companies around.
Right.
And that's that idea of business automation, where technology-wise or methodology-wise, we might start talking about things like business rule management systems, where if I hard code all of my business logic, the way that I want to react to scenarios inside of my applications,
good luck.
Then anytime I want to change my business, that means I've got to get developers to go and change those applications and services. And now think of an environment that's 5 years old. Are the same developers there? Was that software well versioned? Was it well documented? Those changes might be very difficult to make. If I want to change my environment, maybe what I wanted was a set of rules, right, that were defined in combination between the business analysts and the application developers themselves and the business owners.
It's pretty much the same flexibility rules that the operations person wants to say, if I'm going to deploy a lab with 12 VMs, here's the template. It's the same kind of thing.
It's a really good analogy, right? So in that layer, that cloud management platform layer, where I can define policy on how operational practices are put into place, right, or how they're actually, I guess, executed, right? The same thing exists, like Shane is saying. Business rule management systems allow for kind of the centralized collection of a set of rules that represent how the business wants to behave under certain scenarios. Once I remove that from the application code itself, I have a place so I can start to dynamically change.
Okay.
Right? A good example of that might be, parcel delivery, or something like being a service provider like a cable company.
Well, yeah.
Things are changing, we better be able to change with it.
And it's the same with the IoT deployment too in the rail industry. If you have a second rail or have a partner rail train on the rail, how do you deal with that data? So I really do get it now. It's more than just an OS company. You can definitely drive towards more of an infrastructure space, provide all the capabilities from not only a developer and virtualization space, but also the administrator and the ops to manage the full scale. Moving into the stack, I want to get out of my day-to-day operations, but enable a catalog so that people can consume while I'm busy doing other more important things.
Yeah.
And also leverage some of the capability that the developers have in the OpenShift and the container space, reuse it in ops, and do that drive-through, and then finally get into the business part of the whole world and say, how can I make the changes, or how can I enable those changes in the business flow so that I can drive the time to market much higher.
That's right, and just be more reactive to your customer needs, right? At the end of the day, that's what we want. That's what we probably all want.
That's cool. Well, thanks, Jason. So really, in essence then, Red Hat is more than just an operating system company. If you look at the operations, the developers, and the business users themselves.
Yep.
So from a developer's perspective, I have the operating system, I have virtual machines and running in a lab, but from an operations world, I'm able to then encompass that and say, here's how I'm going to deploy the labs, here's how I'm going to maintain the labs, and I can do that in a very automated fashion so that I don't have hands on keyboard.
That's right. Get rid of that experience of having to in a sense, interact or even have a difficult time getting to what you need. Just make it as easy as possible.
And then in the whole DevOps world, try to leverage what the developers are doing in continuous integration and continuous delivery.
That's right.
And use that in the operations space so that they come together and say, here's how your applications are being managed, and here's how your applications are being developed. How do they come together and actually drive into the business itself?
That's right.
From the business perspective, how do I make changes on the fly, or how do I make more flexible changes within my applications and my business itself? Whether it be collecting the data or making sure there's guaranteed data to actually drive into the business so that I'm not locked into any sort of lockstep operational change control, and the developers have that same flexibility and freedom to have different versions in their entire life cycle.
That's right. We like I said before, we want to remove that buildup of technical debt and allow you to have not just an application architecture, but a business architecture that allows for flexibility and agility and basically responding to either market demands or our customer requirements themselves.
So the ecosystem's way bigger than just an operating system.
It really is, and
That's cool.
and we're happy about it.
All right, well, thank you, Shane. Thank you, Jason, for today's enlightening discussion at PureLogic U. We really appreciated the time that you took to walk through the business world, the apps world, and the development world, as well as tying that all in with operations. So we look forward to having you both back again in the very near future for our next edition of PureLogic University. Thank you very much for attending PureLogic University, and we'll see you next time.